nCast, the podcast from FinOps. Each week, we'll explore the world of cloud cost management, the latest in AWS optimization, and getting practical about your FinOps journey. Join us as we dive deep into the latest trends, tools, and best practices, while having conversations with leaders and luminaries who are innovating on the front lines. Our goal is to provide value to the community through insights and practical advice that will help you to achieve your FinOps goals. So whether you're in engineering, leadership, finance, or a cloud professional, this is the place for you. Sit back, relax, and get ready to join the conversation on nCast.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of nCast. We've got a great guest here today, and so I'm excited to get into some topics today about automated governance in the FinOps process. And so today I've got Savanna Jensen. Savanna is a senior FinOps Success Manager on the AWS Optics team. That's a mouthful of a title. So Savanna, maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your position and what is the Optics team at AWS?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, James. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking about all things FinOps with you today. As you mentioned, we've got a lot of acronyms going on here. You can even abbreviate FinOps Success Manager to FSM if you want to make it even more complicated. But the Optics team deals with basically anything related to FinOps or cloud financial management for some of AWS's largest and most strategic customers. Optics itself stands for Optimization Intelligence for Cloud Systems. And as a FinOps Success Manager, the soundbite I usually use is if it has a $sign on it and you're having trouble with it, send it my way. I might not be able to be the person who fixes it end to end, but I can definitely get you pointed in the right direction. And I can help you think about kind of how to manage your cloud costs on AWS and how to build your organizational strategy around healthy cost management as well. So basically, we deal with money is the short version.
Hey, money and optimization, two of my favorite topics. So we're gonna have a great conversation here today. Automated governance. So I like the ring of automating any sort of process, and I think that it's a big part of the FinOps journey. First of all, we started to get a little bit of a rein around getting visibility about what's going on in our environment. But I think a lot of organizations are going to struggle with where to get started because it feels like the bar is pretty high, and maybe you can help us to believe that it's a little bit more approachable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say in general, every organization is different, right? Every organization has a unique product and a unique outlook on the world. So it's hard to give you one single magic bullet and be super prescriptive. But in general, the less amount of people time that you can dedicate to managing and governing your cloud costs and the more kind of automation and checks and balances that you can bake into the system, the easier it's going to be and the better the time you're going to have, essentially. So we've got a number of tools on the AWS side that can kind of help that along, right? And take some of the concern and the stress and time effort out of analyzing your cloud costs. Before we get into those, though, I think the real big thing that a lot of kind of anything really is predicated on is the amount of kind of cost allocation and cost visibility that you have. And you mentioned that a little bit. But if you don't understand where your costs are coming from, or you haven't kind of developed those visibility solutions yet, and you don't have a way to investigate them or see them or check in on them, it's really hard to implement any of those kind of management pieces, simply because if you get an automated notification that says, hey, this account spend went up, and you don't know who owns that account or how to even go look at that spend, it's going to be really hard for you to go investigate that. So really that visibility piece is the solid foundation on which you have to kind of build everything else and build kind of the cost culture of your organization around. So.
Right. Well, the FinOps journey strikes again. I mean, visibility is where that journey begins. I find that while account partitioning is really an easy way to get started with sort of partitioning your spend, it oftentimes becomes much more complex than just partitioning by accounts. There are certain things that the teams can act upon when it comes to things like compute spend or database spend. Actually, a number of services, reservations, and commitments come into play, which are often centrally managed. And then, of course, we know that the way that those things apply and rolling those out to teams so that they have an amortized view of what they're actually spending. All of that can be really complicated. So what tools would you say that customers could start with, and then might lead into the first concept of maybe automated reporting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? It can be as complicated as you want to make it, and every organization is going to have a little bit of a different spin on what needs to happen. But I would say, in general, socializing kind of the difference between a consumption-based model and like an amortized view is going to be key, especially if you have those reservations, to help folks understand what they're looking at. Because if you are centrally managing your reservations, that recurring fee or that upfront payment is going to hit the account that they live in, not necessarily the linked accounts that are actually spinning up those EC2 resources and using those things day in and day out, right? So figuring out a way to expose that kind of effective rate to your end users and show them an accurate representation of what they're actually consuming with any of those kind of reservation-based models layered on top of it is going to be critical. We do have some resources to help do that within the well-architected labs. I know there are a good amount of webinars that are available, some reInvent recaps as well, around how customers have set themselves up for success there, or kind of how they've decided to think about that in their organization, what philosophy they've developed. But kind of picking a variety that you want to show, right, is critical there. And then kind of building some sort of cost allocation strategy around that philosophy that you've adopted is definitely step one. I don't think there's any right way to do it necessarily. I think there's a right way for any single organization to do it. But again, like just based on your purchasing strategy and what workload mix and account mix you have in your organization, it can vary pretty widely. But in terms of automation, once you have that cost visibility strategy established and you've made some of these business decisions about how you want to report out on these things, you can kind of go from there in terms of the tooling. The most granular billing artifact that we have is called the cost and usage report, which I think probably most folks who are listening to this would be familiar with at this point. So if you really need that deep level of granularity, that's where you're going to have to look. With that said, it is a large, unruly data set with a lot of data in it. So definitely kind of the first step to understanding that application in a very granular way, but not necessarily something that everybody's going to be able to get their arms around. From an AWS perspective, at this point, we've got a very robust set of kind of pre-built dashboards in QuickSight called the Cloud Intelligence Dashboards that we've seen people use in a very educated way to report on this. Those, because they are so customizable, can be really great for kind of distributing those insights to different folks within your organization. And the teams really put a lot of work into making sure that we've got kind of a smorgasbord of options that can target each single stakeholder. If you're an executive just looking for a readout, we've got kind of some recommendations there versus kind of the operational folks who have kind of a need to get more in the weeds, right? So that's one way to do it. There are a lot of things that you can stack on top of those Cloud Intelligence Dashboards in QuickSight to make sure that you are only viewing like a certain subset of data or making it super custom to whoever's consuming it. Again, those kind of need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and you need to know exactly what you're doing there. But that's kind of, I would say, the most shiny thing that we've got at the moment. In terms of maybe the like 200 level rather than 300 level, if you're looking for something more out of the box, Cost Explorer is a great resource. We've got a lot of really exciting updates to Cost Explorer that launched in reInvent 2023 that people are starting to get excited about and use more. So longer look back period in the cost data. We've got up to 38 months now instead of just 13, which is awesome if you want to compare year over year. We've got resource level data. Both of those are free features that you can enable through the preferences section, which is great. And then I think kind of most relevant to the automated piece, we do have two pieces of functionality called anomaly detection and budgets, which folks can use to alert on kind of different spend spikes or if your spend crosses a different threshold. Sorry, I know that was a ton of information.
No, it was a ton of information, and I was just keeping mental notes because you hit on so many great points. Over here at FinOps, our first step is always to understand what our customers' FinOps goals are, right? That's where the journey begins, is what are you really trying to do? And then we like to get into the more automated optimization feature side of things. But you have to attack not just based on impact, but organizational priority, and when you have teams that are actually able to focus and are a priority to help to achieve those goals. You mentioned that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and I have such a variety of customers that I speak with. I know one that does centralized FinOps where, and this is a rather large cloud spend in the grand scheme of things, pretty sophisticated operation, and in their organization, they don't want engineers to think about those commitments. In fact, they don't want engineers to know about the commitments at all because they have such a robust set of automation that they have around that, and their planning activities are so robust that they only want the end user to be thinking about on-demand rate. That they do have spot in the mix, and they even have a lane for spot. But at the end of the day, they want to abstract that complexity. In a lot of organizations, they don't have that level of sophistication, and so it's very critical that every team understands what their true unit cost is. It makes me think, hey, there's tools that can be adopted, and again, FinOps, we do offer cost analysis and allocation features for free, and I understand that the size and the engineering effort that goes into that. You got into the QuickSight dashboard stuff. I've had a chance to take a look at that, and there are some very, very powerful tools. What persona do you think is like, does that hit the best? I have my ideas, but I can think of specific sort of users in the organization who are going to love the QuickSight functionality. Where do you think it hits?
Yeah, so it really depends on, I guess, which dashboards folks are deploying out of the gate. But I think it hits kind of that sweet spot between people who are just getting their feet wet with kind of the more cloud side of finance, and have a little bit of familiarity and want to play around in the console. And people who are maybe coming from the other direction and have a lot of experience in AWS, but aren't necessarily super used to the idea of thinking about like what unit cost means, right? Deploying them is easier than ever, I will say, now with the new data exports integration, which was also a reInvent launch. It's a lot closer to one click. You can do it in a linked account. It's straight through the billing and cost management console. But when it really comes to that customization element, that's where I see people get really excited. And I would say FinOps practitioners, obviously, like if you've been in the space for a long time, I know a lot of my managers have this story. I have this story. I've heard like a very similar story from a lot of people, but back in like 2018, 2019, a lot of people printed out like a copy of the car, like an Excel document, printed it just to look at the columns and see what was there and try to get an understanding of like what that data looked like without having to scroll through like Excel back and forth for hours and try to figure it out. So it's really exciting for, I think, anybody in the FinOps space to be able to have a way to play with cost and usage report data that isn't building pivot tables or kind of redoing your queries and going back and forth and trying to figure out what's in there, but is instead visual and graphic and gives you kind of that control. So I think the folks that I see who get like extremely stoked about it are the people who maybe have some familiarity with either one side or the other and then deploy this thing and now have a bunch of presets they can play with and realize the power that they have when they can essentially like save as and edit and play around with this data and say, okay, I actually don't care about the entire like storage tab. Let's say I don't have any S3 workloads. Probably wouldn't happen, but let's pretend, right? I can delete all of that. I can make a very custom view that only features everything that I care about. And then it's so easy for me to look at that every day and have it very targeted to what I care about and monitor it day over day or month over month and share it with other people in my organization. So that's a big one. I did want to touch on what you said about unit cost and kind of helping folks disentangle that level of commitment from the engineering level.
Let's get into it.
So I think everybody, or like a lot of organizations I've seen do this a little bit differently, but the concept of unit cost and like an averaged out rate is something that I've started seeing a little bit more of. We do have a couple ways to calculate like unit costs through that are default in the Cloud Intelligence dashboards. And I've seen a lot more companies trying to like think about what that really means for them on a compute level or on a storage level, right? But some sort of averaging across the organization, especially if you have like not close to 100% coverage and you're not going to get close to 100% coverage and you're just trying out a savings plan for the first time and it's kind of floating around, making sure that that's consistent and like a good experience for folks month over month, and they can look at their usage in a way that's a little bit more tied to consumption or running hours rather than your cost fluctuating because you spun up a more expensive instance that's now getting covered is really critical. And in the cost and usage report, we do have some columns that can help with that. And there are kind of a couple ways to think about amortized costs and averaging that out. But especially if you are in a scenario where you're making a lot of changes to your FinOps strategy and you're implementing a lot of these savings for the first time, I would say that's when it's the most critical. Like if you're already at a place where you're 90% optimized and you're doing great, your month over month fluctuations would be a lot smaller, assuming that you have a fairly consistent workload. But if you're going from the crawl stage of we haven't done any optimization and now we're trying to do a bunch of it at once, you're going to see those fluctuations more. And that could be confusing to the folks who are really hands-on keyboard every day when they get their bill at the end of the month or when they log in.
Right. And that could be a complicated thing to do, but I see a lot of wisdom in that, especially when you're just getting started out with budgeting and trying to introduce concepts like anomaly detection. Because, one version of anomaly is, hey, I guess in this world, it could be, well, I saw an unexpected spike in my expense, and the actuality is that the RI could have just gone elsewhere, right? Mm-hmm. It really, especially in organizations of scale, it is sort of, well, it's impossible to predict, right? These things are applied in post when cost and usage is generated, and B can lead to false signals. So that's great advice on getting started. Now we're at the step where we've got pretty good visibility, right? We've started to establish some ground rules around budgets. Now, how do we distribute that to the masses and give the people at the ends, hands on keyboard, the DevOps engineers, the software and infrastructure engineers, that are at the end of the day on the hook when something happens? How do we give them the ability to get real time visibility and total control, not only of unexpected things, but to be able to profile expected changes?
Mm-hmm. So making sure that they have an avenue for the visibility aspect is definitely key here. Make sure that there is some sort of like philosophy throughout your organization, whether it's to use a third-party tool if you have a good, robust third-party build-out, whether it's the QuickSight dashboards, whether it's Cost Explorer, whether it's Billing Console. Hopefully you're not using Billing Console, but sometimes people do. Give them some way to see what their costs are and kind of make a recommendation about that. Make sure that they have support about it, especially if they're very new to this. So if you're a FinOps practitioner, setting them up with the right education and the right resources to actually investigate these costs is pretty critical. And then from there are a lot of things that you can do within the AWS tooling suite to kind of decentralize this work a little bit. One of the ones that I'm most excited about, and I've seen folks have a lot of success with, is anomaly detection. So AWS Budgets works off of a threshold that you set. For example, you can say, notify me when my bill goes over $80. And it will send you a notification when your bill goes over $80. Very threshold based, configurable, but not always the most context aware. Anomaly detection is backed by machine learning, and it is there to essentially detect patterns that are not what we've seen in the past on a service level, on a linked account level, on a tag level, throughout kind of all the bells and whistles and dials and knobs that you're used to seeing in Cost Explorer. So what you can do is essentially, once you've kind of started to be thoughtful about how your accounts are structured and how you're allocating spend, is you can create cost monitors through anomaly detection that will notify you when a certain kind of chunk of your spend reaches that anomalous situation. And we do have a Slack integration for it as well. So instead of sending those notifications to one central FinOps email, you can plug them into the Slack hook and instead push those notifications to an engineering chat of a team associated with a project, or to a notification pool somewhere that people look and are actually keying into day to day. This has a couple benefits from a purely and strictly selfish perspective as a FinOps practitioner. The fact that you don't have to kind of do all the work of wading through all those notifications and you're sending it directly to the consumer and directly to the folks who could investigate it is a big time saver. But I think kind of the more interesting benefit, rather, is it helps that cost awareness throughout the organization. And it allows you to kind of let the system alert on this rather than you as a FinOps practitioner being the cops or being someone who's always pinging an engineering team saying, hey, have you taken a look at this? Hey, can you take a look at this? Hey, what's going on here? So it kind of helps folks think about that cost day in and day out, and be proactive about investigating their own spend rather than you having to be the trigger for folks, which is helpful, especially if you are trying to build that relationship and keep it very sweet and very positive.
Sure. Well, I've said at least 100 times on this podcast that what I often see is that FinOps, from a DevOps engineer's point of view, and I won't actually say FinOps. Let's not put FinOps on on trial here. It's the experience of cloud spend control, costs control to the engineer feels like a punitive experience, which means that somebody gets a bill, somebody gets an alert, that there has been OpEx that wasn't planned for or accounted for, and usually there's two causes to that, right? Like the scale is real. And, I don't know how many times I've been working with customers, but also leading my own engineering teams where the component or the perspective that was not analyzed as part of the capacity planning and load testing was the cost impact. And it could be on some tricky dimensions, like network costs are always a thing that get you, or that they're an unanticipated consequence of something that you're going to do. Or maybe somebody misconfigured something, or you have a tool that isn't handling auto scaling correctly, or you've inadvertently oversized a huge production cluster, and when it scaled up, there was a huge expense. So the experience from the engineer's point of view is that what will always happen is that somebody's going to come and hit me over the head with a hammer, and then we're going to spend 2 months trying to make as many adjustments and optimizations as we can. We like to say that that's driving in the rear view mirror.
Yeah.
So with these cost anomaly alerts, one problem that I see is that some leader or even motivated engineer gets the idea to go set these anomalies up, and they put them in some public channel, and after some period of time, no one's quite sure whose responsibility it is to take action on them, and then, like everything else, we start to filter them out. Mm-hmm. So it really feels like there's a big cultural component to actually making sure from top to bottom that this is an organizational priority. Is that something that you have to coach and evangelize on? And what can you recommend to the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a snag that we see folks hit. And there are a couple of ways to handle that. I would say, like, the top thing to take away, and the top no to avoid no matter what, is if you are setting up any of these alerts or any sort of monitoring system that's going to send people notifications, be context aware about your business when you're making the decisions to do it. Because let's say you are a large retailer and it is almost Black Friday and you're about to scale everything up for a large traffic spike. That is the worst possible time to enable any sort of alerting for the first time, because you're going to hit all your thresholds. It's going to be a lot of noise. Everybody's going to be stressed out anyway. And you're going to get all of these kind of pings and bobs and emails all the time. It leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth right away. Similarly, like if you're migrating onto the cloud for the first time, maybe scale it back a little bit in terms of the alerting. Keep that to just yourself as a FinOps practitioner, or to a distro, an email inbox that's not directly paying people, because if you're not exactly sure what that kind of steps to getting onto the cloud is going to look like, it's really hard to configure good alerts. Always test it yourself, take a look at what's coming out of that, and make sure that those notifications are actually getting at what you want to get at before you roll it out to the broader organization. Because you want to essentially give people the best data that you can immediately. Because if they have good data that they can take action on, and then they see the kind of positive outcomes that come out of taking action on the data that you're providing, they're going to have a better concept of what that tool is. They're going to be more positive about it. They're going to care more. In a broader sense, try not to be like the bad cop all the time. It is a big one. And sometimes that's just phrasing. You can kind of present an opportunity as, hey, I think that this might be something that you can take a look at to save money, and that will improve your budget. Do you want to take a look at it together and see if there's an opportunity to make this more efficient? That's a lot better and a lot more positive way to frame something, rather than, hey, this is costing a lot of money. What's going on here? Right? So it can be simple. And recognition when people do something well also always helps. People love a pat on the back. It's always a positive thing to tell them that they're doing well. So keep in mind how it's coming off when you implement these processes, especially if you're doing it for the first time.
Right. And so, one of the things that I often guide and work with customers is to set measures of success, right? And you can pick a lot of KPIs, but KPIs have to be meaningful. So I always say, save money is not the reason why we're doing this, right? Even the FinOps foundational text tells us that we're doing this to get value out of the cloud for our organization. And so I can think of a couple of examples, gamification and also setting meaningful targets and allowing teams to sort of self-determine what do I think that I can achieve during this quarter, and what is going to be the measure of my success. Set them up, give them the opportunity so that when we checkpoint, we could say, how are we tracking towards our overall success, and also giving everybody total transparency into the goals of the organization from a cloud financial management perspective, but also building that culture where everybody is aware of what the budget is, what their piece of the pie is, how they can impact, and what the end game is. Are there any recommendations that you have where FinOps organization can, or FinOps practitioner or a finance team can engage with engineering teams and turn this into a success criteria rather than sort of the opposite, which is I caught you and you missed your budget and
naughty,
right?
Yeah. There's certainly a lot of different ways to position it. I would say with the KPI tracking specifically, start simple and start small until you get some sort of adoption, but don't feel like you're stuck with what you started with. And what you may find, depending on, again, your kind of engineering teams and your product SKU, is there might need to be different KPIs for different products or for different groups. If one team is really excited about modernization and that's a big priority for them, maybe they're going to want to track how many instances are on the previous generation versus current generation, some sort of graviton migration metric, right? But if there's another team that's less excited about that and really just wants to kind of beef up a different part of their infrastructure, or they're focused on lift and shifting onto AWS, that might not be the best metric for them. So keeping that flexibility and really starting those dialogues with each group is important so that you're not just being super prescriptive about that tracking. Right. Once you have some sort of alignment and you start that tracking, if you find out that you're not measuring what you thought you were measuring, or it's not really indicating the changes that you expected to see, you can always iterate on it. You can always tweak it. You can always start measuring something else that's a little bit more meaningful, change like what sort of unit cost metric you're looking at, right? But make sure that it's topical and make sure that it is actually getting at what you were hoping it was going to get at. And then from there, some of it's kind of culturally dependent, or depends on established like business cadences, right? But some sort of recognition mechanism is definitely a good one to start with. I think if you have a top engineer of the month or something like that, or you have quarterly launches and we metric on fix the most bugs, add in some sort of kind of gold star
incentive.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, a bonus is always nice. Engineers will never turn down a cash bonus.
Yeah. We need to know. It's also something that I think is like sometimes a career gold star for folks who
Yeah.
are looking to grow in their career, improve a certain
Yeah.
skill set, right? If you can say in your like promotion filing that you saved the organization X amount of dollars by optimizing XYZ, like that's a pretty compelling reason why they would consider kind of you as operating at that next level.
Hey, I think it's a huge resume builder, to be honest. You know, I interview, and over my career, I just have interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of engineers, and one of the best ways that the engineers can demonstrate their eminence is by a focus on optimization and efficiency. And so I know that you may be very effective at writing, you know, Ruby code or Python code or Go or whatever, you know, the language du jour is, but to come in and to be able to talk with depth about those times that you've looked at efficiency at a system level and operationalized efficiency in such a way that other engineers could digest and clearly see KPIs and set SLOs and SLAs around those. That demonstrates maturity. So I just wanted to really give the gold star to you on that point, because that's a real, I guess, a carrot, if you will, to engineers when you're trying to get them to understand, why should I care about this really boring stuff, right?
Sorry, they're fine. They've been running forever. They're chilling. Like, no,
right.
Don't.
It's really not only about, you know, hey, we've been HA, we've had cloud native architectures, you know, we've done DR exercises and we do security exercises, but that none of that really is the greatest measure of engineering efficiency, right? It's more of a measure of the contract that we have with our users, that we're going to be available and secure and performant and all of those things. And maybe that's one of the biggest pitfalls, is that the cloud makes it very easy for us to do that in a data center centric fashion, but this is a consumption-based world, right?
Yeah, and I think like reframing sometimes the impact of a couple buttons that you click in the console or the command line that you execute is definitely step one if you're moving from an on-prem world. My teammate Steph Gooch talks about it a lot, kind of it's somebody else's money mindset, right? And that visibility and that cost allocation to an extent too are, again, kind of the foundation of helping folks understand the impact behind some of these decisions. And the more that you can surface it to them in their day-to-day, the more that you can bring it to the forefront, the better, because it is a reminder, but it also kind of ties together with that agility and the excitement and the experimentation of the cloud, that this is something to keep in mind as well.
Hey, you know, even in the space that we're in, we deal with optimization from top to bottom. We deal with ingesting, you know, trillions and trillions of rows of CUR data and analyzing them every day. I had to have this conversation with my own team the other day. I like to just be totally transparent, where, you know, we're doing a different cost allocation strategy. You know, the finance team has asked us to look at things a little different way. That's a really healthy exercise for us to go through as an organization. And so my naivety, thinking, hey, these people are experts. I asked my own team to go out and everybody, you know, make sure that everything is tagged or allocated. And, you know, we have some really cool tools in FinOps that makes like untaggable or untagged, the things that are not there yet, able to be, you know, ruleized, if you will, and allocated to different show back values. So I said, all right, you know, everybody's going to swarm. You take this piece of the pie, you take that piece of the pie. I went back and I looked and I was like, team, this is 25% allocated. And so everyone sort of had the mindset that hey, I allocated my piece, and my colleague allocated their piece, and and then it occurred to me, the mindset is not about what should be allocated. The mindset is about what's not allocated, right? This exercise is not done. I can guarantee you, and I've got a lot of showbacks. My CFO has a lot of showbacks, and in every one that I do, that the game is not done until every penny falls into some bucket. But it just really struck me that without a lot of context, and just as kind of like just a quick exercise, just given those set of instructions, allocate your things, that there was such a huge amount that, and it was all explainable. There was nothing surprising. So a huge amount of it is just mindset.
It's those gosh dang shared services again, isn't it?
It's the shared services. It's the RIs. It's the marketing team owns that thing. This isn't product, But like it's everything that's not on my side of the fence. And I, in my mind, well, then that should be the easiest stuff to put into another bucket, right?
Yeah.
Like bucketize what's not yours, and then let's look what's left, right? Maybe that's a really fun place to start.
Absolutely. Besides, can I ask you a question about that?
Please,
Besides the kind of low amount maybe of the first pass of allocation that you took, what was your biggest surprise coming out of that exercise?
My biggest surprise is that the team really, I mean, number one, it was that the team thought that they were done.
Yeah.
And that, and then the CFO and I, we get together and we do have, we have cadences where we get together and talk about, FinOps as an organization. And that is one of our KPIs. And we have really cool budget adherence reports and things like that. So I really thought that experience would have informed, and it just, to me, I think my biggest surprise is that maybe just in myself that it didn't occur to me that I didn't frame the exercise in such a way that they want, it was me. It was me. It was not them. I said, "Oh, go tag your stuff." And what I should have said is like start with what's not yours and then tag all the rest, right? Get it, that's the exercise that's at hand. So I think that helps me also to work with other people and help them to understand, like, gosh, that was an embarrassing meeting with my CFO because the platform lead said, "We're done." we get out of a meeting and it was like, well, not even this organization with all the understanding and features that they have quite got the exercise right.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these are hard problems, right? Like, that's why we're having these discussions. That's why I would say, like, the FinOps ecosystem has really taken off in the last couple of years, because especially at scale, like, this stuff doesn't have an easy solution always, and it certainly doesn't have a universal solution. So it does require like a good amount of analysis, and it needs to be nuanced based on your organization, the people that you have, and how everybody works too. So it's hard. But it's interesting, and it is not an unconquerable mountain for anyone.
It is not. And I think that's what we're here to evangelize, both you and I. So I think that's a good opportunity for you maybe to take us out. If there is, if I am an engineering leader or just getting started in my FinOps practice, and I'm not seeing, my number one problem is traction, right? Mm-hmm. Where do you recommend that people look to? What resource? Where to get started?
Yeah, so I would say make sure that you have the data to back you up initially when you're having these conversations. And that goes back to the cost allocation. It goes back to the visibility. And sometimes if you're having these conversations about who's spending what, the data to back you up in that case is, here's all of our spend. We don't know who's using what. You try to figure out why it spiked, engineering manager. You can't, well, we can't either. This is why this makes everything so important to do. So let's kind of come together and figure out a way for you to get better cost visibility, better cost allocation, better tagging governance, et cetera, right? So come with data and don't be afraid to iterate or pivot or ask for help. The other one that I think I'm seeing a little bit more of, and that's helped folks kind of beat the analysis paralysis, is realize that crawl, walk, run, or like the maturity in one area is not necessarily the maturity in every area. So maybe you feel like you're really not doing well because you have a bunch of unoptimized EBS spend. That doesn't necessarily make it so that everything in your organization is getting like a 0 out of 10 grade. Think about end to end what you're strong at and where you can improve, and then essentially like stack rank those priorities so you know what to tackle first.
Maybe workload management, right?
Yeah.
I mean, hey, if spot is not a conversation that you're ready to have.
Mm-hmm.
Some organizations are more ready to do spot than they are to downscale and pause idle resources. Mm-hmm. But other organizations, hey, maybe your bigger bang is to build a tagging strategy, and everything that's tagged with QA gets turned off, but on up to a very sophisticated schedule, right? So that's a great and sage piece of advice. Well, Savanna, I know we could go on like this for forever and ever, but I think we've about come to the end of this discussion, and I hope that we have the opportunity to have more discussions like this and maybe turn the crank and talk about more advanced topics and get a little bit more into the walk and run.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you joining us, and to everybody out there who's made it to the bitter end, I'm going to guess that you're about as nerdy about this stuff as we are. So keep on tuning in. We've got a series coming up with folks from the Optics team, and then some exciting episodes on back to one of our favorite topics, which is cutting edge Kubernetes optimization. So we're going to be all over the place. Savanna, thanks again.
Thanks so much for having me, James. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Let's do this again. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to nCast. We hope you enjoyed the episode. As you can tell, we love to geek out on all things cloud optimization. If you have any questions or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram, or just shoot us an email at ncast@nops.io. If you'd like to learn more about the continuing innovation over at nOps, or about our free FinOps platform where you never pay anything unless you save money, check us out over at www.nops.io. Until next time.